Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I am absolutely fired up for today's session. To all the learners out there tuning in, welcome to a very special high-octane edition of the show. We are doing something a little different today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And for the aspirants listening, I mean, this isn't just a casual chat.
Right.
We're really going to be dissecting the political history of ancient India with a level of detail that is directly relevant to your exams. We're talking prelims, of facts, mains analysis, and the connective tissue that binds it all together.
That is exactly the plan. We are framing this entire deep dive as a full, comprehensive summary, specifically tailored for the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But before we get into the heavy lifting, I want to hook you with something.
Okay, let's hear it.
We often talk about democracy as this modern Western invention, right?
Yeah.
Like we look to Greece, we look to the Magna
Market
Carta.
suspects.
Exactly. But imagine a time in India, over 1,000 years ago, where village council members weren't chosen by who had the most money or the loudest voice, but by a lottery system specifically designed to prevent corruption.
It's wild to think about.
It is. Imagine a time when a king wasn't just a tyrant in a castle, but was theoretically considered a paid servant of the people, earning his keep just like a soldier.
It sounds almost utopian, doesn't it? But as we'll see, it was a complex mix of high ideals and sometimes really harsh realities.
Yeah.
It's the golden age of Indian administration, and it has lessons that are still surprisingly relevant for you today.
Absolutely. But first, a quick but vital housekeeping note for our community. If you are listening to this and you find value in what we do, please, I humbly ask you to subscribe to the Simplified UPSC by PPP channel. It really helps the algorithm find other learners just like you.
And if you are capable, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Creating this kind of high-value, research-heavy content takes resources, and your support literally keeps the lights on and the content flowing.
It really does.
A massive shout-out to all our current supporters. You are the backbone of this project.
Yes, thank you all so much. Also, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. Tell us what you think. Share a thought. It boosts the video and helps us grow. Now, for the study materials, I know you guys love your notes.
I do.
We have free notes with practice previous year questions, or PYQs, available right now on our public Telegram channel.
And for those who want to get serious, you can join the private Telegram library.
Oh yeah, the private library is gold.
It really gives you organized access to all the videos in this series, premium detailed notes, extra PYQs that we don't release publicly, and model mains answers. If you want in, just DM us on the public Telegram channel.
Okay, business done. Let's unpack this. Today we are diving into basically the Bible of ancient Indian history, which is The Wonder That Was India by A.L. Basham.
Specifically, we are cracking open Chapter 4, The State, Political Life, and Thought.
Right. This chapter is essentially the blueprint of ancient Indian polity. So our mission today is to decode it.
Exactly. We're going to move from the abstract theories of kingship, where did these kings actually come from, down to the gritty details of bureaucracy, the Secret Service, and the incredibly sophisticated village administration.
And crucially, we are going to link all of this to your UPSC preparation, connecting the dots to previous year questions.
So let's start at the very beginning.
Yeah. Section 1, the origins of kingship. We're talking about the state of nature. How did we go from people just living in the woods to having a king? Did someone just wake up one day and say, I'm in charge?
Well, Basham presents two very distinct opposing theories that emerged in ancient India. It's fascinating because they mirror the debates European philosophers like Locke and Rousseau would have thousands of years later.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so the first theory comes from the Vedic texts, specifically the Aitareya Brahmana.
Vedic view. This is the older one, right? Reflecting the Aryan expansion period.
Yes. And it's grim. The theory here is based purely on military necessity. The legend goes that the gods and the demons, the Asuras, were at war. And the gods were losing. They were getting absolutely hammered on the battlefield. So they met together to figure out why they were failing, and they decided, we are losing because we have no king.
Ah, so they needed unity.
Exactly. They needed a single leader to unify their command. So they elected Indra to be their king.
So in the Vedic view, the king is essentially a war hero. It's a military office born out of an existential threat.
Precisely. It implies that kinship in India arose from the need for protection and leadership in war. It's a very top-down approach. But then you have the opposing view, which comes from the Buddhist and Jain traditions.
Right, and this is much more of a social contract theory.
Yes.
I really want to double-click on that social contract theory. The Buddhist story of Mahasamata It feels so modern. It's almost secular, isn't it?
It is remarkably secular for the time. You really have to understand the context here. This theory arose in the Eastern Gangetic Plain, so Bihar, Eastern UP, around the 6th century BC.
Okay, so a time of big changes.
Massive changes. This was the area where the Iron Age urbanization was happening. Old tribal loyalties were breaking down. You had new cities, new trade, and a lot of social churning.
Right.
The Brahmanical theory, the one about Indra and the gods, worked really well for the established tribal kingdoms in the West. But in the East, where Buddhism and Jainism were rising, they were questioning everything.
They were questioning the caste system, the Vedas, and naturally the source of the king's power.
Exactly. So they strip away the divinity entirely.
They say you aren't a god, you're an employee.
Correct. And the specific details of the legend are very telling. The state of nature described in the Buddhist Nikaya is idyllic at first. It's a golden age.
Like a Garden of Eden scenario.
Sort of, yeah. People were ethereal beings, self-luminous, moving through the air. They didn't need food, they didn't need clothes, and crucially, they didn't have private property.
It sounds like spiritual communism.
It really was. But as cosmic decay set in, they became earthbound, they started eating rice. And once it started gathering food, a very human problem entered the picture: greed.
Of course.
People started stealing each other's rice to hoard it.
Classic. As soon as you have property, you have theft. And once you have theft, you have violence.
Exactly. So chaos ensued. It was the law of the jungle. To stop the stealing and the violence, the people gathered together and made a deal.
The contract.
Right. They decided to appoint one man to maintain order. In exchange for this service, everyone agreed to give him a share of their rice.
And what do they call him?
They called him Mahasamata, which means the great chosen one. And Raja, which they claimed, meant he who pleases the people.
That is such a different vibe from the gods appointed him. This is literally we hired him.
It is radically different. It implies that the king is a servant of the people. He holds office because he does a job, and his salary is the tax, the rice that people pay him.
And if he doesn't do the job?
Theoretically, the contract is broken. There's actually a story where a king claims unlimited power and a humble subject reminds him, hey, you were just a servant paid by the 6th share. Don't get too arrogant. It shows that this idea wasn't just a dusty theory in a book. It was a practical political argument used to check royal power.
But let's be real for a second. In actual history, did kings really act like servants? Or did they lean more into the I am a god territory to secure their power?
Well, that brings us to the divinity of the king. Despite that Buddhist theory, the general trend in ancient India was definitely towards exalting the king. As time went on, kings surrounded themselves with more and more ritual to elevate their status above ordinary men.
Like the sacrifices, right?
Yeah.
Basham talks about the Rajasuya.
Yes, the Rajasuya was the royal consecration. It was a massive, incredibly complex ceremony.
What did it actually involve?
In the Vedic period, it involved the king taking a ceremonial drink to imbue him with strength. But the ultimate flex, the real show of power, was the Asvamedha, the horse sacrifice.
The horse sacrifice. I've always found this wild. Explain how this worked, because it wasn't just kill a horse on an altar, right? It was a major political maneuver.
Oh, absolutely not. It was a massive geopolitical challenge. A king would release a specific, specially consecrated horse to wander freely for an entire year.
And the horse wasn't alone.
No, the horse was followed by a small elite army. And wherever that horse wandered any territory it entered, the local ruler of that land had two choices.
Which were?
Either submit to the king who owned the horse and pay tribute, or fight the army and capture the horse.
So it's basically a way of saying, I dare you to stop me. It's aggressive expansionism, completely disguised as a religious ritual.
Exactly. If the horse returned safely after a year, it meant the king had successfully subdued all his neighbors. Then and only then the horse was sacrificed.
That's a massive power play.
It was a claim to being a Chakravartin, a universal emperor. But it wasn't just rituals, it was titles too. Look at Ashoka.
Ashoka the Great. He's usually seen as the benevolent, peaceful Buddhist king.
True, but he took the title Divinampiya, which translates to beloved of the gods. He didn't claim to be a god himself, but he claimed a very special relationship with them. Later, with the Kushans, who came from Central Asia around the 1st century AD, you see titles like Son of God.
And that scales up over time.
Oh, definitely. By the time we get to the Manusmriti, the law book of Manu, the text explicitly says that even an infant king should not be despised, because he is, quote, a great god in human form.
That seems pretty absolute. It sounds a lot like the divine right of kings in Europe. I am a god, do what I say.
It does sound like it, but here's the nuance that Basham points out, and it's brilliant. He says divinity was cheap in ancient India.
Divinity was cheap. What does that actually mean?
It means that being divine wasn't exclusive to the king. Brahmins were considered gods on earth, Buddhava. Ascetics who performed great penance were considered to have divine power.
Right.
Even the stones used in worship were divine. Cows were divine. So the king was a god, yes, but he was just one god in a world full of gods.
I see.
It didn't give him the kind of absolute unquestionable authority that, say, a Roman emperor might have claimed.
That's a crucial distinction for you to note. So if he wasn't an absolute god tyrant, were there actual checks on his power? Or could he just wake up and decide to ban the color blue?
He was definitely not absolute.
Okay, so this leads us to Section 2, checks on royal power.
Right. And there were significant checks. The biggest one, the overarching one, was Dharma.
The sacred law.
Exactly. In the West, the king often made the law. In India, the king was the protector of the law. The Dharma existed independently of him. It was ancient, divine, and unchangeable.
So he couldn't just rewrite it on a whim?
No. If a king went against Dharma, he was considered illegitimate. Basham tells the story of King Vaina as a cautionary tale.
Oh, this is the guy who got killed by grass, right?
Yes, essentially. The legend says Vena was a wicked king. He banned sacrifices to the gods and demanded everyone worship him instead. He completely confused the social classes. He was a tyrant.
Okay.
So the great sages, the rishis, came to him and tried to reason with him. They pleaded with him, but he refused to listen. So the sages, in a fit of holy rage, set upon him and killed him with blades of kusa grass.
Which I assume miraculously turned into swords or something.
Well, the text implies the grass became like spears due to their intense spiritual power, but the symbolism is what really matters for the exam.
What does it symbolize?
It symbolizes that a legitimate revolt against an impious ruler is sanctioned. If the king breaks the Dharma represented by the sages strikes back. It's a stark warning to any ruler, do not cross the line.
That's a really strong religious check. Follow the rules or the priests will mobilize against you. But what about political checks? Like, did he have ministers?
Huge check. The Arthashastra, which is basically the handbook for real politics, states very clearly, a single wheel cannot turn.
Meaning you can't drive the chariot of state alone.
Exactly. You need the second wheel, which is the Mantri Parasad, the Council of Ministers.
So he had to listen to them.
The king was strongly advised to listen to them. In fact, we have historical records of councils vetoing the king's decisions or even intervening directly in the succession of the next king.
This reminds me of the PYQ connection regarding the Sabha and Samiti. These were from the Vedic period, right?
Correct. And this is crucial for the aspirants to remember. In the early Vedic period, the king's power was checked by two main assemblies, the Sabha and the Samiti.
What was the difference between the two?
The Sabha was a select body of elders and elites. Think of it like a senate. The Samiti was a larger popular assembly of the people.
And they had real power.
In the Vedic age, yes, these bodies could actually elect the king or kick him out.
But Basham notes that their power faded over time, right?
Yes, it did. As the kingdoms got larger and turned into massive empires like Magadha, you just couldn't get all the people into one field for a meeting anymore.
Logistically impossible.
Right. So the Samiti disappeared entirely, and the Sabha effectively morphed into the king's privy council or his court. But the memory of that consultative tradition remained. The king was never meant to be a lone wolf.
Speaking of the king not being a lone wolf, let's talk about his schedule. Basham details the timetable from the Arthashastra. It sounds exhausting.
It is absolutely brutal. The ideal king was allowed only 4.5 hours of sleep a night.
For 4.5 hours, I am incredibly grumpy if I get less than 7.
Well, you aren't running an empire.
Fair point.
The rest of his day was segmented into rigid 90-minute blocks. Reviewing accounts, meeting spies, holding public audiences, consulting ministers, inspecting the army.
Nonstop.
The guiding maxim was, in the happiness of his subjects lies the king's happiness. It was a job, a hard, grinding job.
And if he slacked off.
The text makes it very clear that a king who indulges in pleasure instead of work will perish like a worm in wood.
Okay, so he's working hard, he's sleeping 4 hours. But he can't do it all himself. He needs a machine.
Yes.
Let's move to Section 3, the apparatus of the state. This is where we see the actual machinery of the bureaucracy.
And the Mauryan bureaucracy in particular was massive. It was a highly organized civil service. At the top you had the Ratnans.
The jewel bearers.
Yes. In the older Vedic times, these were the king's inner circle, the treasurer, the chamberlain, the general. By the Mauryan times, this evolved into a very complex system of departments headed by atayakshas or superintendents.
And they regulated everything.
Literally everything. Basham lists them out. Superintendent of gold mines, superintendent of weavers' guilds, superintendent of liquor.
Wait, superintendent of liquor.
Oh, yes, and superintendent of prostitutes, superintendent of gambling.
The government regulated prostitution and gambling.
Regulated and heavily taxed, the state took a cut of everything. It was a very interventionist state.
So they weren't just hands-off.
Not at all. They didn't just watch the economy. They participated in it actively. They ran state weaving factories, state mines, state farms.
And you mentioned the salaries earlier in our prep. This part blew my mind. The gap between the top and the bottom of this bureaucracy.
It is staggering. The Arthashastra actually lists the exact pay scale.
Yeah.
The high priest, the Purohita, and the prime minister received 48,000 penas a year.
48,000 penas.
Okay.
And the guy at the bottom?
A palace servant or a standard foot soldier? 60 penas.
Whoa. What is the math on that? That's 800 times more.
It is a massive disparity. Basham notes that 60 penas a year would barely buy you a copper cooking pot.
So how did they survive?
It suggests that the lower officials probably had to supplement their income very likely through corruption or taking tips.
Right, the classic bureaucratic bribe.
But the top officials were paid lavishly, presumably to keep them loyal and prevent them from being bribed by foreign kings.
Makes sense. But if the guy at the bottom is earning peanuts, how do you make sure he's actually doing his job?
You watch him, constantly.
Which brings us to the Secret Service. You called it a police state. Was it really that intrusive?
If we believe the Arthashastra, yes, absolutely. Kautilya, the author, was frankly paranoid or perhaps just very realistic about human nature.
How did it work?
He classifies spies into two main types: Sanstha, or stationary spies, and Sanchara, or wandering spies.
What's the difference in their roles?
Stationary spies were people who had a legitimate covert job. A merchant running a shop. A farmer working a field.
Sleeper agents, basically.
Exactly. They stayed in one place and just watched the neighborhood. They reported on the Gopa, the local village official. If the Gopa was taking bribes, the merchant spies secretly reported it.
And the wandering spies.
These were the truly dangerous ones. They included the Tikshna, which translates to firebrands.
Firebrands. That sounds violent.
It was. They were desperados who would assassinate people for the state. And then there were the Rasada, or poisoners.
Oh, wow.
Basham mentions that there were absolutely no scruples here. If a minister was suspected of treason but there wasn't enough proof for a public trial, the king might send a poisonous maiden or a spy to quietly eliminate him.
It sounds like the CIA meets Game of Thrones.
It really was. And the justification for all of this was Yogashema, the welfare and security of the state. The individual's rights were entirely secondary to the stability of the kingdom.
Because if the kingdom falls...
The king was the wheel hub. If he broke, the whole society collapsed into Matsyanya.
Matsyanya.
The law of the fish. Big fish eat little fish. Complete anarchy. So the spies, the army, the heavy taxes, it was all justified to prevent Matsyanya.
And there was this detail in the text about the birds.
Yes. The text strongly advised that council meetings should be held in absolute secret and that parrots and myna birds should be physically banned from the room.
Because they might repeat the state secrets.
Exactly. Talking birds are considered a severe security risk. It really shows the level of paranoia and the desire for absolute secrecy in state affairs.
That is amazing. Now, moving from the center of the empire to the edges, Basham talks about quasi-feudalism. We usually think of feudalism as a strictly European thing, you know, knights, lords, vassals. Did India have that?
Basham explicitly uses the term quasi-feudalism because it wasn't exactly the same as Europe, but it was functionally very similar. As the great centralized empires like the Mauryas eventually collapsed, they were replaced by systems where the king had a central core of territory, but the rest of the empire was ruled by Samantas.
Samantas. These are the vassal chiefs.
Yes. A Samanta was a local ruler who acknowledged the emperor as his overlord. He paid regular tribute, and most importantly, he provided troops in wartime.
But otherwise, he was left alone.
Pretty much. In his own territory, he was basically the king.
And how did someone become a Samanta?
Sometimes they were conquered kings who were allowed to keep their thrones after submitting, but sometimes they were created from scratch. Basham tells the story of Uttaramerur, which is a great example of how this system worked on the ground.
Tell us the story.
So Uttaramerur was a merchant. He was traveling with his brothers in a large caravan of goods. They stopped at a village to rest. Meanwhile, a local king was passing through the area on a hunting trip and demanded food for his massive entourage. The village was completely out of food, so they panicked. They went to the merchant Udayamana and begged him to help them out. He agreed and gave the king supplies from his own caravan.
Smart move. Always make friends with the guy with the army.
Precisely. The king was so pleased with this that he invited Udayamana to his court. Later, the villagers were so impressed they asked Udayamana to be their local leader.
And the king was okay with that?
The king fully agreed, and suddenly Udayamana the traveling merchant became Udayamana the Raja, the recognized feudal lord of that village.
That is some serious upward mobility. But I can see how that model eventually weakens the central state. If every village or district has its own little Raja, the emperor is really just a figurehead.
That is exactly what happened over time. This gradual decentralization, this rise of the Samantas, is what eventually hollowed out and weakened empires like the Guptas. The feudal lords simply became too powerful to control.
Speaking of power distribution, let's look at a totally different model. Section 4, Oligarchies and Republics. We often think ancient India just equals monarchy, but that's not the whole story, is it?
Not at all. There were the Ganas or Sanghas. These were entirely non-monarchical states.
We often call them republics, right?
We do, though. Basham cautions that they weren't democracies in the modern sense. Universal suffrage definitely didn't exist. It was more like an oligarchy rule by the heads of the leading families.
But they definitely didn't have a single hereditary king.
Right. They met in a dedicated assembly hall, they debated issues, and they voted. The most famous example is the Shakyas, the tribe the Buddha came from.
Right, the Buddha wasn't a prince in the standard way.
Exactly. His father wasn't a king in the absolute autocratic sense. He was an elected chief of the tribe. And they literally used colored wooden chips to cast their votes.
And what about the Yadhiyas? They were mentioned too.
The Yadhiyas were a fierce martial republic in northwest India. We know a lot about them primarily from their coins.
What do the coins say?
Their coins are proudly stamped with the legend "Victory to the Yadhaya tribe." They also had an official seal that read, "Possessors of the magic spell of victory."
That is a very confident slogan.
They were tough, and they survived a really long time. This actually links directly to the 2020 prelims mindset for our listeners.
How so?
You have to understand the chronology. The Yadhayas and these republics existed very early on, but they were largely wiped out by Gupta imperialism in the 4th century AD.
Okay.
Samudragupta systematically conquered them. So later dynasties like the Pratiharas, the Pallavas, these are all strict monarchies. The republican tradition effectively died out.
That is a crucial key takeaway. Republics are early, monarchies are late. Now let's get to arguably the most important section for our UPSC learners. Section 5, Local Administration, the village.
This is the atomic unit of the Indian state. Empires rose and fell, boundaries constantly moved, but the village remained the constant foundation.
So who actually ran the village?
There were two main forces. First, you had the headman or Gramani. He was usually hereditary, often coming from the wealthiest local family.
And what was his job?
He was the primary link to the central government. He collected the taxes and passed them up the chain.
Basham says he could be a tyrant, but also sometimes a protector.
Yes, it varied. We actually have hero stones or viragal scattered all over the Deccan Plateau.
What are those?
These are stone memorials dedicated to village headmen who physically died defending the village cattle from raiders. So in many cases, he was a genuine local hero.
But the second force is the one that's really fascinating. The council, the panchayat.
Yes, the village council. And for this, we really have to look at the Chola Empire in South India. If you are a UPSC aspirant, you need to tattoo the word Uttaramerur on your brain.
Uttaramerur. This is the inscription that explains everything, right?
Yes. It's a remarkably preserved 10th century inscription that details the exact constitution of a Brahmin village assembly. And the level of detail is just insane. It shows a highly sophisticated system of self-government.
Walk us through it. How do they pick the council?
So the village was geographically divided into 30 wards. Each ward had to select a representative. You couldn't just run for office. You had to be strictly qualified.
What were the criteria?
1, you had to own tax-paying land. 2, you had to be between 35 and 70 years old. 3, you had to know the Vedas.
Okay, so educated, propertied, mature.
But then came the disqualifications. And this is the best part. You were immediately disqualified if you had failed to submit your official accounts in the past.
Wow.
You were also disqualified if you were a known sinner, which explicitly included theft, drinking alcohol, or committing incest.
I love that committing incest and not submitting your tax accounts are on the exact same list of deal breakers.
Administrative hygiene and moral hygiene were both absolutely required. Oh, and there were strict term limits. You were disqualified if you had been on any committee for the last 3 years.
They really wanted rotation.
Yes, they didn't want a professional political class developing who would just hog power permanently. Also, you were disqualified if you were a close relative of a member who had committed a crime.
Guilt by association.
Or perhaps just a structural way of preventing corrupt family dynasties. The Cholas understood that the biggest threat to local governance was nepotism. By using these strict exclusion criteria, they ensured that the village council, the Sabha, remained a body of the community, not a body of a few powerful families.
Now, here's the kicker. How did they actually choose the winner from the qualified candidate? They didn't vote, did they? They used a lottery.
The Kudavoli system, yes. They wrote the names of the eligible candidates on palm leaves. They put all the leaves in a pot.
Okay.
Then they asked a young boy who didn't know what was going on, so he couldn't possibly be biased, to just pick a leaf out of the pot. That person became the member.
Why lottery, though? Why not just vote?
Think about it. It's to prevent factionalism and bribery. If it's a blind lottery, you can't buy votes. You can't aggressively campaign. It's left entirely to chance or to the gods.
That's brilliant.
It ensured that power constantly rotated. And once chosen, these members were assigned to specific functional committees.
What did these committees actually do? You mentioned a tank committee earlier.
The Arivarium, yes. In South India, agriculture depends entirely on tanks or reservoirs to store the monsoon rain. Maintaining the earth bunds, desilting the tank, releasing the water fairly to different farms, this is literal life or death for the village.
So they managed all of that.
The tank committee was arguably the most important job in the village. They even had the power to levy heavy fines on people who wasted water.
It's amazing. We talk about smart cities today, but these were smart villages 1,000 years ago.
And they were deeply accountable. If a committee member was found guilty of misconduct, they weren't just fired. They were often officially branded a Gramakantaka, a traitor or thorn to the village, and their property could be completely confiscated. The stakes were very high.
That is a perfect example of grassroots democracy in action. Moving on to Section 6, Public Finance.
Yeah.
How did the king pay for those 48,000 panna salaries we talked about?
Taxes. The main tax, the foundation of the treasury, was Bogda's share. Usually the king claimed 1/6 of the agricultural produce.
1/6 seems fairly reasonable.
In theory, yes. But in practice, with emergency taxes, water taxes, and local cess, it could be much, much higher. Now, there is a big debate in Indian history here. Did the king actually own the land, or did the peasant?
What does Basham say about that?
Basham leans towards the view that the king claimed ultimate absolute ownership.
What's his evidence?
He points out that the king could legally evict people for not paying taxes, and crucially, if you died without heirs, your land went straight back to the king. The peasant had a right to use the land, but the king held the ultimate title.
And what about trade? We mentioned the merchant Udayamana earlier.
Trade was huge, and it was heavily organized by guilds or srenis. These weren't just simple trade unions. They were massive, powerful corporations.
How powerful?
They had their own internal laws, and surprisingly, they had their own private militias.
Wait, militias? The merchants had armies.
Yes. Trade routes in ancient India, like the Dakshinapatha, the Great Southern Route, went through dense jungles and bandit country. You couldn't just rely on the king's police everywhere.
So they protected themselves.
Exactly. So guilds hired their own standing armies to protect their valuable caravans.
That sounds like a state within a state.
It really was. In fact, we have stone inscriptions where kings negotiate with guilds almost as political equals. Like, you build a temple here and I'll give your caravan total tax exemption. The guilds were the real engines of the economy. They acted as banks, too.
Banks, like taking deposits.
Yes. You could deposit money with a guild and they would reliably pay you interest. Basham mentions the Mandasore inscription, another really key source for the exam.
What does that one say?
It tells of a specific guild of silk weavers who migrated all the way from Gujarat to Malwa because the trade conditions were better, and they became so incredibly wealthy they built a massive sun temple.
And the interest rates. I remember reading the note. Basham mentioned some crazy numbers.
The just rate, as they called it, was about 15% per year. That was for a safely secured loan.
That's not terrible.
But for commercial ventures, it went up. And for sea voyages, which were extreme high risk, the Arthashastra mentions rates as high as 240% per annum.
240%. That's literal loan shark territory.
It reflects the sheer risk, shipwrecks, pirates, storms, but it also reflects the potential profit. If a ship came back safely from Rome or Southeast Asia, the profit on spices and silk was astronomical. So merchants were actually willing to pay 240% interest because they might make 1,000% profit.
Wow. Now, this connects heavily to the 2020 PYQ terms, doesn't it?
It does perfectly. Let's knock these out for the exam. The 2020 paper specifically mentioned the term Hundi. Basham describes these as early bills of exchange.
How did that actually work in practice?
Imagine you were a merchant in Pataliputra, so modern Patna. You want to buy horses in Taxila, way up in the northwest. Carrying actual gold coins for 1,000 miles is basically suicide.
Right, you get robbed.
So you go to a Shresthan, a banker in Patna. You give him the gold. He writes a Hundi, a note coded with secret marks. You travel to Taxila with just that piece of paper. You go to the banker's local partner in Taxila, show the note, and he gives you the gold.
It's paper money. It's basically a medieval traveler's check.
Basically, yes. It facilitated massive long-distance trade. The 2020 UPSC question specifically asked about Hundi in the post-Harsha period, highlighting that even when political empires fragmented, this underlying economic network kept the subcontinent connected.
That's a great insight. And the other terms from that PYQ?
Right, so orang, that refers to a depot or a treasury warehouse for manufactured goods. Then there's Mauryan. This is an agent, specifically an Indian agent working for the East India Company much later, but the term has ancient roots in the Vanunya or merchant caste.
And the last one.
Mirasadar, a designated revenue payer. In the South, these were the people with strict hereditary rights to land who paid the tax directly to the state.
Perfect. Really clear definitions for the exam. All right, last section before we wrap up law, justice, and war.
Justice was very hierarchical. You always started at the village council. If you didn't like the verdict, you appealed to the district court and eventually up to the king's court. The chief judge was known as the Pradvivaka.
And if there were no witnesses, I really need to hear more about these ordeals. It sounds so incredibly medieval.
It is the textbook definition of medieval justice, though it obviously has ancient roots. Basham explains that it was used only as a last resort when there was no concrete evidence, no witnesses, no written documents. It was an appeal to divine judgment.
Give us the examples.
Well, there was the fire ordeal. The accused had to carry a red-hot iron ball in their bare hands for a certain distance. If your hand didn't burn or if it miraculously healed quickly, you were deemed innocent.
That's terrifying. What else?
Then there was the water ordeal. The accused is completely submerged underwater. Simultaneously, an archer shoots an arrow. A fast runner goes to fetch the arrow and bring it back. If the runner returns and the accused is still underwater and still alive, he is innocent.
It really seems like the odds are completely stacked against you.
Psychologically, it might have functioned as a deterrent. A guilty person might just confess rather than willingly touch the hot iron. But it clearly shows the deep integration of religion and law. However, Basham is careful to note that regular everyday courts handled 99% of cases using standard documents, lekia, and witnesses sakshan. The courts were serious, rigorous institutions, not just magic.
Good to know. And finally, war. The Mandala theory.
This is pure Arthashastra again. It's a geometric structural theory of foreign policy.
How does the geometry work?
Your kingdom is the center. Your immediate neighbor is mathematically your natural enemy because you inherently fight over shared borders. Therefore, the king behind your neighbor is your natural friend.
Ah, the classic enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly. It creates a circle of states, or a mandala. It fundamentally assumes that peace is merely a temporary preparation for the next war.
Do they have any rules of engagement?
There were ethics, theoretically. The formal laws of war stated you shouldn't kill a sleeping enemy, you shouldn't attack non-combatants like farmers, and you shouldn't burn the land.
Ideally, right?
Ideally. Basham Rayleigh notes that these rules were frequently and brutally broken, but the mere fact that they existed shows a conscious desire to somewhat civilize warfare.
So we have traveled from the divine military appointment of Indra all the way to the lottery pots of the Chola villages, from the high philosophy of Dharma to the brutal realism of the Mandala theory.
It is a truly massive canvas. And if I can leave the learners with one final thought, it is this. We very often look to the West, to Greece or Rome or the Magna Carta for the roots of democracy or federalism. But the Ganas of the Shakyas and the Sabhas of the Cholas show a highly complex indigenous tradition of self-rule that operated right here. The big historical question for you to mull over is, why did the republican tradition eventually die out in India while the monarchy survived all the way until the modern era?
That is a great question.
Was it the sheer efficiency of the Mauryan bureaucracy that crushed it? Or was it the desperate need for a strong central military leader against foreign invaders like the Huns? That is something to really think about as you study.
A fascinating what if. Simplified UPSC by PPP listeners. I really hope this deep dive gave you those aha moments you need for your prep.
We tried to pack in as much high-yield info as physically possible. Just remember, the Chola administration and those key terms, Hundi Samiti Vishti, which is forced labor, those are absolute gold for the exam.
If this deep dive added value to your study routine, please subscribe to the channel. And if you can support us on Patreon, it genuinely allows us to keep doing this deep research and bringing you these detailed summaries.
And definitely check the Telegram channel for the free notes and PYQs linked to this specific discussion. If you want the full organized library, join the private group.
Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. We actually read them all. Until next time, keep learning, keep curious, and we will see you in the next deep dive.
Goodbye and good luck with your prep.